Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, the 24th of October, 2006, at 10:30 a.m. The interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
James Wagner, and I was born in Buffalo in March 10th of '48.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I had 13 years. I had my high school, and then I had 1 year of college.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
All right. When was that, please?
That was in April of 1968.
Okay. Were you inducted here in Buffalo?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic?
I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. How long were you there?
For my boot camp training, and not exactly sure how many months that was.
Okay.
Usually about 8 weeks for basic.
Okay. Did you go for any additional training anywhere else after?
Yes, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, for cook school.
And how long were you there?
Until I shipped off to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. What was could you describe the training as a cook? What things you learned, and had you had any experience prior to that?
Yeah, I was in college actually for food service administration, and I cooked a couple places here in Buffalo before I got drafted.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got drafted, they asked if there was anything that I would like to do, and I mean, I just said to them, yeah, I'd like to be a cook, but I didn't think that I would actually get it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because they said cooks become truck drivers become cooks,
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
So they taught you basically how to cook for large numbers.
Large numbers, right, and they emphasized no seasonings. It was very bland thing, and let everybody put in what they wanted as far as salt, pepper, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically cooking for large amounts of people. And like I say, no seasonings, which I wasn't used to it. I always would prepare it a different way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, when did you go over to Vietnam?
I went there in also April of '69.
Mm-hmm. Were you assigned to a unit at all before you went over? Did you go over?
I was with the 299th Combat Engineers.
Okay. Did you go over as a unit?
No.
How were they sent over? How did you go over?
Well,
Did you go as a replacement into that unit, or?
yeah, I was
Okay.
a replacement, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was a bad thing, I think, of the Vietnam era veterans, because most of the time you weren't sent as a unit, you were sent as
Right.
individuals. And I noticed in different conflicts that you would go as a unit, and I think it would give you more reinforcement of fellows that you knew and stuff
Mhm.
like that, where you were kind of, by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably flew over to Vietnam.
Right.
And whereabouts did you land?
Well, when I got in Vietnam, I landed in Cam Ranh Bay.
You mentioned here that you were right under attack almost right away when you.
Yeah, in Cam Ranh Bay,
Cam Ranh Bay.
they had a mortar attack shortly after I got there. It was like within hours they had a small mortar attack, and I remember when I got there, the buses that took us to where barracks were all, the windows and everything had all like screening on them and everything. They were all protected for shrapnel or whatever. And,
Where did you go from Cam Ranh Bay?
I went to Dak To, which is in the Central Highlands. It was near Pleiku.
Mm-hmm. Did you fly up on a C-130?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was your impression when you got into the Central Highlands, the Dak To area?
At first, I was, it was, you know, it's a cook, and I thought, well, you know, I'll just be in the mess hall, you know. And then we had a first sergeant at he volunteers for a reactionary force, people which we would have to go out if there were convoys that were under attack. We would be the reactionary force to bail them out, pretty much. And that was surprising to me because, and at that time we had M14s. We were issued M14s when I was there, which is a heavier weapon than what an M16 would be, and the clips are bigger and stuff. And not too long after that, we were issued the M16s.
So they were using you as an infantryman besides being a cook?
Yeah.
Which did you prefer, the M14 or M16?
M16s.
Why?
They were lighter, the clips were lighter, and they were easier to break down, and I thought they were more accurate in firing.
Did you ever have any trouble with jamming up on you or anything? Or?
No, not really. Now the M14, I had a problem with it, doing that. But my M16, I never did have a problem with it. Once we got off that I wasn't on a reactionary force the whole time I was there. This was right in the beginning of me being in Inducted. And Inducted was, little did we know it was going to be, they had the regular North Vietnamese regulars were surrounding the camp, plus they had the Viet Cong. So after the reactionary force, I went in and mainly was doing cooking after initial, like the first maybe couple of months. You know, before that I was doing both. They take me out, say you gotta go out to so-and-so convoy. But after a while they didn't have convoys come in. They used to have the choppers coming in and dropping off supplies, because it just got so out of hand that they couldn't bring in trucks. And any kind of recruits or anything, they also brought in on choppers. So.
Did you get hit with mortars and rockets fairly regularly?
Yeah, we got hit. We had to wear flight jackets and helmets all the time, and then we had to sleep in bunkers. And a lot of times we had to go in the bunkers during the day too, and then they had foxholes dug all around the compound. Every little ways there was a foxhole that you could go in. We got, because that's how often they'd get, you know, hit with rockets and mortars.
Did you ever run into any shortages with them having to bring in the helicopter resupplies or?
No, it didn't. We used to get quite a bit of supply. There never seemed to be a shortage, not to my knowledge anyways. Nothing with food-wise, until we actually got hit. The mess hall, there was a couple of things that got hit, direct hits. The mess hall was one of them. The mail room was one of them. And we had I don't know if they would call it a club or a beer tent. That was one of them. It was like direct hits, and it turned out that there was a couple of guys that in the beginning they had help with the village people. People from the village would come in and do little odd jobs and stuff. And it turned out that they found one guy who was like pacing off different things, and it turned out to be he was a Viet Cong. And so after that they banned all outside, you know, villagers from coming in.
Did you have much contact with the Vietnamese people then? Or?
Mountain yards mainly. I would go in the beginning. We used to go down into the village and mainly to get a mamasan, something. But we also went for purpose of black market. You know, they had different things on a black market.
Was that pretty active in your area?
Pretty active. Yeah.
What kind of things did you?
You could get a lot of things. You could get, I mean, You could get a Jeep probably if you wanted it, you know, and they had actually, I remember somebody having a shark skin suit first, you know, that you can get your hands on. You get stereo equipment. You could get, and it was funny because, like being a cook, I had access to fruit and vegetables and stuff, you know. So if you took like a case of oranges, for instance, or apples or something like that, you could practically, you know, get what you wanted, you know. It was just that, and cigarettes was another big thing, was if you had American cigarettes, which I didn't have that because I didn't smoke really, not cigarettes anyways, but you could get a lot for like a carton of cigarettes or even a pack of cigarettes. So you could go.
Okay. Did you have any contact at all or experiences with the South Vietnamese Army?
Yes.
What did you think of them?
Not much.
Why?
Well, when we were on a reactionary force, the first contact I had with them, they were there also when we would go out and bail out like the convoys, and they have all heavy equipment. They have, you know, recoil assist rifles and M60s and tanks and different things like that. Never would do, they'd go the other way for some reason. It was like they were scared or weren't trained proper or whatever, whatever reason it was, they would seem to not take part in the fight, you know. And it just turned me off because I'm thinking, here we are for them, you know, and they can pitch in to help, you know.
Now, you said that you thought daily life was pretty stressful there
Yeah.
because you were under fire all the time, is that
Right.
basically? Okay. What kind of foods did you prepare while you were there?
Well, at first we could have, there was a lot of dehydrated foods for one thing. Your potatoes, like mashed potatoes and stuff was powdered. A lot of the vegetables were also dehydrated. We get some fresh, you know, fresh things in, but it wasn't, it was scattered, you know, sometimes depending on how heavy the fighting was or whatever, and the drops and stuff that they had for from the choppers. That would depend on what kind of food you were having at the time. Sometimes we'd have steaks, you know, and I made a heck of a soup that the other companies would come and they raved about my soup because I would use I'd throw everything in it, eggshells, everything, and then I would strain it, you know, strain it out and start with that, start with the stock first and then add vegetables or meat or whatever, you know, to it.
Did you get any seasoning?
No, not really.
Still
wouldn't put no seasoning in, but you can, there's a way of cooking though with the different things that,
Right.
you know, give you that flavor without the seasoning.
Yeah.
Did you have to prepare a lot of food to be sent out into the field by helicopter, anything, or
No, it was
in company area?
mainly a big thing with sea rations. We had a lot of sea rations that were sent to the field. Actually, sea rations saved my life, actually, because I was in where the Bunsen burners were. Now, Bunsen burners were something that you used to get hot water to do your pots and pans and stuff, and I was in there doing pots and pans with a flight jacket and helmet on. And in the next room was sea rations, just stacked right up, you know, right, probably to the ceiling almost. And a rocket went in the room with the sea rations, and when it blew, the sea rations took most of the brunt of it, you know. And of course all that stuff flew, you know, pieces of stuff were on me, like of the food, you know, and I had small shrapnel wounds, and I had a concussion and some ear damage. And I must have been knocked out because a fellow just called me up and told me that he dug me out, and he said, I called your name. Of course, maybe it was my ears too, but he says you didn't respond. And he says, I got down and I looked and I could see your hands, so I started digging stuff out. And he says, once I got the stuff off, he says, you shot out of there like your rear end was on fire, you know. And we both jumped in the same foxhole.
Do you remember him doing that, or?
No, things moved so fast, and the only thing I can remember is after it happened and I was laying there, I kind of felt, you know, that I thought, oh man, I gotta be messed up somewhere, and I was feeling my arms and legs and stuff. And then I had, like, my flight jacket was ripped open, I can remember that, my helmet was gone, and, but I was whole, you know.
How many shrapnel wounds did you have?
I was just peppered, you know, just a little bit peppered, but another fella, the same rocket, all the way down at the other end of the mess hall, the butt of the rocket went and traveled that way. It took one of his legs off right up to the groin. And I just met that fella after all these years at a reunion that I went to about 3 years ago. And he just happened to be talking to somebody, and I happened to be sitting right near where he was talking, and I overheard him. And he was saying how he got this injury, you know, because he had a prosthesis. And he said, gee, I wish I could meet the cook, because I know there was a cook that came in. We were both taken to the medevac area there, and he said there was a cook that got hurt too. And when he said that, I turned around and said, I'm the cook. And then we were, oh man, it was just like, it was something. But yeah, it's funny how this fellow that dug me out said, it's no wonder he said you were about 3 inches of getting killed, because another piece of the rocket took out, why the whole building came on me was another piece of the rocket took out a support beam, went right through the support beam and through the wall, and it landed just outside the mess hall. He said it must have missed you no more than about 3 to 4 inches. So,
When did this happen?
June the 3rd, I believe it was. It was in June of '69.
How long were you in the hospital for?
I was in maybe about 2 weeks, you know, and then they sent me back. And then I was just like freaked out, any little noise or anything, you know. I remember a guy sliding a chair into the table, and then, you know, I was ready to hit it. I thought it was incoming.
Now, you mentioned here you had some hearing loss because of that.
Yeah.
Okay. What were your officers like?
Mainly they were a lot of good people. Our commander was good. A lot of the first lieutenants were good. There was a couple that were, I think, full of themselves or whatever, and, you know, hard asses, and, you know. But on the whole, I would say that they were pretty good guys. Now, our first sergeant, he had a drinking problem, and I kind of got a bad taste in my mouth with him, because he would volunteer us for stuff, to do stuff, but he wouldn't do it himself, and he would kind of stay back and, you know, get off the hook with stuff, you know. And I thought, you know, you would think he would go with his men, you know, if he, you know, but.
You mentioned here one of the most amusing things was your pet monkey that was that with your unit, or?
Yeah, the fella got a monkey from the jungle, I guess, and one of the grunts must have got the monkey. And they had made a little pair of fatigues for the thing. The thing was only about that high. And all I can remember, the monkey reminded me of that monkey in Rama the Jungle. Rama the Jungle, the monkey's name was Babette. Now what this monkey's name is, I couldn't even remember, but they had this little pair of fatigues for the thing, and he would drink beer like you wouldn't believe. He would just sit there and drink beer, and then he'd get bloated and stumble all over the place, and, you know, make all these faces and fall off the, you know, I mean, it was comical.
Now, you also said that one of the people you remember the most was a fellow cook.
Yeah.
Could you talk about him a little bit, please?
Yeah, George Washington was a fellow cook, and he was a black man and came from Rochester area, I believe he lived. And he was one of them guys that you immediately liked.
Now, was he there when you arrived?
I think we just, I can't remember if I was there first or he was there first. But it was around, we were both there around the same time, the whole time. And he was, you would never hear him say a bad word about anybody, and you would never really hear him cuss or, you know. Of course, everybody usually did, you know, but he was an exception. And I've talked to him on the phone since I've been out and everything. He lives in Florida now, Gainesville, Florida. But we're a nice guy. Nothing to say, nothing but good things about him.
Okay. How long were you in Vietnam?
I was in there 13 months.
Did you get an R&R at all?
I went to Bangkok
Mm-hmm.
on my R&R. I was going to go to, I was thinking about going to Australia. But I don't know how I wound up in Bangkok, but I didn't regret it. Bangkok was great, you know. And you know what? I was with this one woman for the whole time. She treated me like I was a king. I mean, you couldn't even eat, but you know, she'd feed you. So it was good. And then seeing all the different things in Bangkok, the big golden Buddhas and bridge over the River Kwai, seeing this and Thai box and you know, all these different things.
Did you ever get to see any USO shows?
I don't think they were USO shows. I don't really recollect any. There was some shows, but I'm not sure if they were.
They used to bring bands in occasionally, probably.
I don't recollect that.
No.
Were there any other
Now the
incidents?
thing I did see, excuse me, but the thing I do remember, we were getting hit, actually overrun. They pulled everybody out except the 299th Combat Engineers. Because the engineers are always last to go because they keep the roads and bridges open. So everybody else pretty much had gone, you know. And they finally pulled us out and put us in Quy Nhon, which is on the coast of Vietnam there, and it was like a resort. Really, the place was, had clubs and you could go water skiing, surfing, and you know, all different kinds of things, bars all over the place and everything. And I wasn't, at that time I didn't have too long to go. I had maybe about, I think like just over 6 months maybe left to go. And that first sergeant again, he sent me back to the boons. He sent me back to a place called Bang Sang, which was right into the, you know. And I was there, but I was only there about maybe, like I said, about 6 months maybe. But I was so mad because I'm thinking, I made it. And then he sent me back again, you know. And it wasn't as bad in Bang Sang though as it was in Dak To. Dak To was wild.
When did you return home?
It was January of '70.
Okay. Were you aware of the anti-war movement at all?
Was it what?
Aware of the anti-war movement?
Oh yes, big time. I mean, that's something that just it saddens me that we weren't, a lot of times now the fellas, you know, everybody's with the veterans from Iraq and everything, I mean, they get a lot of praise, and which they should, and we didn't get any of that. We were like, always called like baby killers and spit on, and I can remember when we got off, when we were at the airport, they were throwing bags of urine at us, you know.
Now, did you come back in uniform, or did you change?
Yeah, no, we came back in uniform. Yeah, but they were dressed. We came back, and I came back in when we got back.
When were you discharged?
Well, I was discharged in April, so.
From whereabouts?
It was California. I think it was
Fort Ord?
Fort Ord.
Do you ever read about Vietnam at all now?
Actually, it's a funny thing because our unit, well, different companies that were there in Dacto during the time frame of the siege and stuff had a reunion, and about 3 years ago, and it was right here in the Falls, and they had all kinds of pictures, you know, everybody that had any kind of photographs or that, and one guy had an 8mm movie that he had made, and he had taken it and turned it into a video. He was showing that, and then they had, you know, lots of people talking and different things on what their experiences were and stuff. That was something, because after like 35 years, it's there, but you try to have it in back, and then all the stuff was coming forward, you know.
Do you watch any movies at all about Vietnam?
Yeah.
Or do you stay away from them? Which do you think are ones that you think are most realistic, or?
I think Platoon was right in there. And Full Metal Jacket too, somewhat, but as far as Apocalypse Now, I thought that was very Hollywood. That was very put on. You know?
Were you aware of any drug use, or?
Oh yeah, big time. Big time. I myself got into marijuana quite on a regular basis. You know? But no, there was all kinds of things going on, and a lot of drinking. You know, if you could get your hands on anything. So,
What were race relationships like within your unit? Were there
Very good.
any problems, or?
no, very good. We had, we never had a problem, and everybody kind of depended on the other guy, kind of thing. We all mixed, we all, you know, like partied together and stuff, and when we could, and we never had any problems as far as that goes.
Did you make use of the GI Bill at all when you came back?
No.
How about, I know you've answered some of this, you have attended a reunion and stayed in contact with some people that you served with. Okay, did you join any veterans organizations?
I did belong to the American Legion for a time period, but then I kind of let it lapse. It was over on Delaware Avenue, the Bronx Shuttle
Oh,
Post.
yes.
And, but I kind of just let it slide and stuff, it wasn't going and stuff. And, I don't know why, I think maybe the distance, because I lived on the east side, and I don't know for what reason, but that's about the only one I ever joined.
How do you think your time in the service changed or had an effect on your life?
Well, when I first came back, I was a different man than when I went. I often, I was very easy to anger things. I remember my first marriage, I was doing a lot of things as far, I would never hit my wife or anything, but I would leash out at things and like put my head through the wall, or put my hand through the wall, you know, punching it. And matter of fact, she had me put up barnwood paneling so I couldn't go through it. And because you were getting sick of moving the pictures you could only move so many times to put it over the hole. But it was it wasn't good. And you know, like like she locked the door, we had an argument, locked the door, took the whole door right off the hinges, you know, and things like that. So I was a pretty nasty guy at first, and then over the years you kind of you know, mellow out a little bit. And, but my first marriage, I think a lot second marriage was very good marriage, excellent marriage. Well, my first marriage was good too, except for me. But my second marriage, it was more pain because my wife was kept me under too a little bit, but I had a great marriage the second time around.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Thank you.